Welcome. My name is Jody Craner. I work with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute. Today, the webinar will be on dementia and pre-crisis planning. We have 3 experts that will be presenting. I'm going to do an introduction of each of the presenters, and then after they have presented, then we'll have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So let's start with our first presenter. So Karen is a licensed clinical social worker. She has 25 years of personal and professional experience working with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Before her current position as a dementia care specialist with the Aging and Disability Resource Center of Rock County, Karen worked as a hospice social worker, the Alzheimer's Association Care Navigator Manager, a geriatric psychotherapist and memory care director. Karen's experiences as a family caregiver serves as a catalyst for her efforts to improve the lives of people living with dementia and their caregivers. Karen will be going first. And then after Karen, we're going to have Holly Shoemaker. She is an attorney, a managing attorney of the Guardianship Support Center of the Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources, otherwise known as GWAR. Holly received her law degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School, where an internship with the Dane County Corporation Counsel's office led her to an interest in guardianship and disability advocacy. Prior to joining the GSC in 2019, Holly was a staff attorney at the ABC for Health, where she worked with families of children with special need, healthcare needs, and adults of all ages to address insurance and public benefit concerns, long-term care options, and transitioning planning. And the final presenter today will be Senior Sergeant Carrie Peters, who has a bachelor's degree in human services and a professional leadership. She has been with the Appleton Police Department since 2008. She is a certified dementia specialist and helped create dementia training for law enforcement and other responders. Additionally, she runs Project Safe Response, which is a registry program for the community members with dementia, autism, or other cognitive impairments. So that is our lineup of presenters. And so our first, as we go through the 3 presentations, feel free to put questions in chat and comments, and then again, we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Karen.
Okay, so I'm going to share with you here. All right, everyone, good?
It's good now. Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, I have to apologize if I sound a little like Foghorn Leghorn, but I'm getting over kind of a, I don't know what, bronchial type thing. At any rate, so as Jody mentioned, I'm the dementia care specialist for Rock County, and I do want to thank the Wisconsin Dementia Resource Network, Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute, and especially Jody for being such champions of people with dementia and for their care partners, and continually facilitating these really valuable conversations. I do take the weight of representing the Dementia Care Specialist program as an honor, and I really do appreciate being here. I'm hoping that today I can provide a little bit of background as well as some resources for services that are available through your county's Dementia Care Specialist program. So who are dementia care specialists and what can they do for you? We do focus on 3 different areas. The ADRCs, the Aging and Disability Resource Centers themselves, people living with dementia and their care partners, and then the community at large through things like onboarding and ongoing training. We work with our ADRC specialist so that they can be trained to provide memory screenings for individuals in the community. These screenings really encourage and are meant to encourage open conversation about brain health, as well as proper dementia diagnosis. We also facilitate dementia capable training for our ADRC units, which usually occurs during our staff meetings. We provide education through support groups. Support groups are great because there's usually people kind of at the beginning, the middle, the end, and sometimes often past. Once someone has died, that family member still, caregiver still continues to come to that support group. So besides the emotional support, there's lots of resource sharing and just kind of general basic information. We also provide education through family meetings, which I'm going to talk about in quite a bit of detail today. Caregiver classes, other types of events, resource development, as well for not only people with a diagnosis or cognitive change, but also, again, their care partners. And then for the community at large, dementia care specialists really have been effective catalysts in promoting dementia-capable communities. So we work with all types of businesses like banks, grocery stores, local service organizations, clergy, senior centers, law enforcement, first responders, medical providers, government agencies, and then just the general public, so that we can educate for a better understanding of the unique needs of an individual with a cognitive change, and again, their care partners as well. And we facilitate those educational events for professionals, and provide dementia-capable training for those businesses and organizations, focusing not only on general dementia knowledge, but also on communication, and even physical plant changes that might enhance the lives of people living with dementia and their care partners. So far, kind of a cogent theme for anybody. Realtors say location, location, location. DCS say education, education, education. And this next slide really is just just a sampling of the programs, classes, and services that DCS might offer to folks with a diagnosis, their care partners, and again, the general public. But it really fully supports that three-pronged mission that I talked about initially. And we develop those programs based on the needs of our individual counties or tribal community. We are required, as part of our process throughout the year, to provide at least one evidence-informed program. So that would be something that's based on research and expert opinion, as well as one evidence-based program, which is something that's gone through oftentimes a randomized control study or trial group that has validated the research findings. So one of each of those, but I will tell you that every DCS does much, much more than that throughout the course of a year. And if you look at the slide, you can see again some of those examples. So things like the powerful tools for caregivers, savvy caregiver, stress busting for caregivers of someone with dementia. Those programs really are all obviously focused on the caregiver, but they provide a lot of caregiving skills about communication, caregiving strategies, as well as additional information on the disease and the disease process itself, and focus on improving the caregiver skills to therefore improve the person who's living with the diagnosis. Dementia Live, if you have never had an opportunity to go through that, it is a simulation experience that includes a debrief at the end. So it's meant to give folks participating some idea of what it might feel like to be someone living with a cognitive change or a dementia diagnosis. Obviously, you've probably seen the Purple Angel in different places, and that's given to businesses and organizations that have gone through our dementia-capable training. You'll also see the purple tube there. That is something that we're going to talk about a little bit more towards the end of my time with you. And then there's also examples of a professional conference that I personally did and a caregiver conference as well. So there's a variety of things, again, that are focused on what the individual community is looking for and might need. So how do we as DCS specifically see crisis related to dementia? And how can we help you to avoid or lessen or de-escalate what may be considered a crisis. Well, it's going to be more education, right? We work very closely with families and people living with a diagnosis on preventative education. And this is including a care planning for crisis prevention. And it's really meant to prepare the family for what things might look like in the future, what is to come, the possibilities that are there. And so we try to help families manage that day-to-day care, again, focusing on communication, approach techniques, and disease information. I tend to be a better safe than sorry type of gal. And so with dementia, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't. And so, you know, saying, oh, she'll never leave the house without me, or my dad will never be physical with me, or she's always going to listen to what I tell her. We work, again, a lot with families to help them understand that just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. And during those family meetings, those really are meant to be times for needs assessment. So there's lots of discussion. The meetings don't follow the same track every time because each situation is different, each family is different. Each family might have different priorities or access to different resources. And, you know, there might be different concerns on the part of the DCS that come up during those discussions. We do talk about advanced care plans, not just the paperwork, but the wishes, so that that person, for as long as they are able, can contribute to those conversations and make their wishes known. We focus a lot on home safety and security. Obviously, wandering is a huge concern, and driving, if someone continues to drive. Those are two main focuses on home safety. I tend to talk a lot about layering safety and security, again, including the Purple Tube program, also including Project Lifesaver. You know, there's so much access now, easy access to things like camera and tracking devices and things you can have on your phone, those types of things. So layering all of that safety and security, and really the cost now in comparison to you know, what could occur if you don't have it. I think there certainly is a cost benefit there. They're relatively really inexpensive at this point. We work with the person with the diagnosis and the family to come up with some goals. You know, is it going to be staying in the home? What is that going to look like? How can we make that happen? We obviously talk about financial concerns because those, it is really expensive to care for someone, whether it be in the home or in long-term care. So that's always a concern. I talk a lot about how to build the village, to the caregiver village, in order to increase, especially for the caregiver, how do we increase their support? And what other resources are available? And who can they call? Who can they count on? Who can they use for different things throughout that experience? And, you know, when is more help needed? What might that look like? Is that going to be in-home care? Is that going to be a combination of family and in-home care? What might additional alternative types of care look like, such as hospice support? And, you know, it's not feasible for every family to keep someone in the home. So what might placement look like? How does that process work? What can we expect, you know, the possibilities of that being? We might talk, obviously, we're going to talk about caregiver needs and concerns. What are their wishes? Are they the only one in the family that's really involved? What is the level of involvement of other family members? Are they able to do things that aren't direct hands-on care? What's the family dynamic? We very often quickly get an idea of what concerns there are related to that. Again, communication and approach and disease information so that they're better understanding the disease. And this whole process really could take place over one meeting, a couple of meetings, or over a couple of years. I tend to find that families and primary caregivers sort of sample the programs and services and classes that I'm offering, really based on how much they can absorb emotionally. How much can they absorb knowing more? Uh, and so oftentimes they're trying things. And as they can absorb more and emotionally manage that, then they're trying something else. All along, we provide, again, resources and support, again, as well as lots and lots of education about the disease process, what to expect, how to communicate, how communication is going to change, approach strategies. Things come up almost on a daily basis as the person is changing and progressing through their disease. And so that is a continuing, ongoing conversation. We also look at the why a loved one might be behaving in a certain way. There is a reason for every behavior, and how behavioral symptoms of dementia, especially related to specific types of dementia, may look is going to differ. So with a specific diagnosis, we can provide some additional layers of information of what might be coming down the pike. There's something too that I used as a hospice social worker. I learned from great hospice nurses called chimbops, looking at unmet needs, physical, usually unmet needs. So things like constipation. When is the last time that's happened? Is the person in pain because it hasn't happened? Hypo, whether that's blood sugars or fluid retention. Infection. Does the person have a UTI? Which can change an older person's personality that does not have dementia. It's just further complicated by their dementia. Medications. Has there been a medication change that maybe has sparked something else to happen? When was the last time they fully emptied their bladder? What is their breathing like? Is it labored? Are they having trouble? Are they short of breath? Are there other things going on with that? Pain is a very significant one, because depending on where that person is in their disease process, their communication skills might be at a point they may be completely nonverbal, or they may have trouble communicating what they're actually feeling because their brain can't process. Those are very complicated things that our brain does for us. And so talking about nonverbal pain cues, those types of things, just as, again, a detective tool for the caregiver. And I always add social for the psychosocial aspects. If COVID taught us anything that was good in any way, it was about social isolation and what it does for folks. And so engagement and feeling like you have a purpose. Everybody needs a job, right? We need to feel useful and purposeful. So how can we do that? It's going to look different, but how can we do that? And I came across a saying, I guess, or a quote, probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And the speaker that I was listening to said, they're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And, when that person with the diagnosis looks the same, families, that's a very difficult concept often for them to understand and to grasp onto, that person is not doing these things on purpose. And then we are there to help them to better manage that and learn how to give them the tools of how to better manage that. We talk a lot about how roles and relationships change, whether those are spousal roles or it's an older adult child that's caring for a parent now. Those also are very complicated emotional things that happen during the caregiving process. I do a class with a co-facilitator that also focuses directly on the grief and ambiguous loss associated with caring for someone with dementia. It's different than caring for somebody that has another chronic illness or another terminal illness like a cancer or something else. And so we focus directly on those types of issues. Being prepared to, we talk caregivers a lot about being prepared to expect that what works today may not work tomorrow. We certainly focus on, and a lot of our classes focus on self-compassion, the need for respite, knowing that you're not alone, but that you can't do it alone. So again, building that caregiver village of how do we make that happen? We extend that process again through our classes and the support groups that we facilitate, offering other resources as well, reputable websites, books, reputable Facebook groups. Because for a lot of caregivers, if you're an adult child caring for a parent, you're working. You may be that sandwich generation where you've got kids still at home, you have a job, and now you're also caring for a parent. Midnight may be the only time that you really have time to be able to access any additional information. So we provide that as well. Similarly, DCS provide community education to really mobilize those community resources. And again, we consult with law enforcement, first responders, our APS, our Adult Protective Services units, our crisis response teams, other medical providers, and others to just really provide that disease process education and dementia-related symptoms so that we destigmatize those symptoms and remove them from that crisis list and put them on the disease symptom list. Again, focusing on communication and approach skills and understanding the process. It's really crucial to be able to successfully communicate and have successful encounters with someone with cognitive change to be able to understand that. We wouldn't ask somebody with lung cancer to breathe better, but we constantly ask people with dementia to think better. So we're the ones that have to change. We have to learn. We're the ones that have to adjust. And that person with dementia can no longer make those changes or adjustment. And so as part of that effort, many counties do utilize the Purple Tube Project. And that's really to help those encounters during emergent or potentially crisis situations. And the goal of the project is to assist families and first responders to better serve the person with cognitive change or a dementia diagnosis, so that they can have important information quickly accessible. And so again, it's an actual purple tube. I don't know if you can see it. And we spend a little bit of time going through the forms and things that should go into the purple tube. But things like the healthcare power of attorney, a recent photo, if the person is still driving, that vehicle information, release of information, because of course the tube can go with that person. They need to be transported to the hospital. There's also a form that talks about, how do I communicate with this person? What are their typical behaviors if they're feeling anxious or fearful, and how do we address that? Emergency contact. Who's the best person to contact, if we are at the house and, we need to contact someone else? Because what happens, if the caregiver goes down, right? Then we need to be thinking about, again, the level of communication that person with dementia is able to provide to us. So this is just another way of doing that. And that purple tube, then the law enforcement and first responders are trained to know that there's a dot that goes on the door and that the tube will be in the refrigerator so that they can then access that information, and don't have to rely on the person with the diagnosis may not be a reliable reporter of what occurred and what's happening. And of course, some of the best ways to avoid or lessen and to better understand de-escalation is to refer to us, to consult with us, to use our programs and trainings, so that we can ensure the best quality and most appropriate care for those who have or may have a dementia diagnosis across all lines of service. And of course, BCS, we want to have those collaborative relationships. We want to develop those relationships. We're interested in what it is that you need and think would be helpful. We, specialize programs all the time. So working with those resources, starting with the ADRC and then working with APS unit, crisis units, other law enforcement when they need to be involved, and then with us, and of course, always knowing that family and the person with the diagnosis are at the center of that. And if you do want to know more about the program itself, this is where you can find that. And how you can get more information. But really, and just so that you know too, every community, every county and tribal community now has at least one dementia care specialist. And again, if you want to connect with them, you can do it directly through your county's ADRC. For me, today is really about a call to action, and just a little bit more awareness, a little bit more education, a little change in perception. We can say today, not on our watch. And so utilize us, use our knowledge and our passion so that you can increase your awareness and learn more appropriate skills. I really thank you for your attention, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Karen, for wonderful information. There is a question in the chat as Polly is pulling up her presentation. It asks, where can you get the forms for the purple tube? Is there a link you can put in the chat, or can you let them know where that is?
Sure. So for counties that have that program, not every county has that. And it's very easy to start in actuality, but not every county has that. But you can get that through your dementia care specialist. They would have the forms, they would have the tubes, they would have, all of that information.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Karen. And now we'll turn the webinar over to Polly.
Thanks, Jody. So I'm going to build a little bit on what Karen was talking about in terms of people being able to document their wishes, what it looks like when another person takes over legal decision making, what happens if somebody doesn't have those documents in place. I recognize a lot of names that I see on the participant list, so this will be review for many of you, but I think it's worth it to consider it in this context and what it actually means when we're talking about turning legal decision-making over to another person. So when we talk about advance directives, in their most basic form, they are a way for people to document their wishes to the decision maker if they're not able to make decisions on their own. Primarily, I'm going to be talking about power of attorney documents. There are a couple of other kinds, but that's the main one for today. And again, I'll briefly cover what happens when somebody doesn't have one and isn't able to make their own decision. So what is a POA? At its heart, it is basically a contract between that individual and their agent to make certain types of decisions on the individual's behalf. Why have one? Because for the most part, Wisconsin's not a next of kin decision-making state. Which means that if somebody wants their family member to be able to make decisions for them, they have to give them the authority to do that.
Okay.
I think that's probably the most common question I get on my helpline is coming from family members who want to know, how do I get power of attorney over my loved one who is now in the hospital, who has this new dementia diagnosis, who has some sort of a crisis going on? How do I get power of attorney over them? The short answer is always that you can't. They must give it to you. They must know what they're doing when they sign that document. They must do it of their own free will. The decision to create it and everything in it has to be driven by that person. POAs don't remove rights from people. It's only a determination. If it's activated on incapacity, it's only a determination of the extent to which those actions are legally enforceable. So who can create one? Any adult who's of sound mind. And I've got a slide on what sound mind means in a second. It is entirely voluntary. It can be revoked at any time, even if it's activated. Who makes the decisions? For healthcare, typically activated on incapacity, which means the agent who is designated is the person who is making decisions while it is activated. For financial, it can be activated right away as soon as it's signed, which means that the person could still continue to manage their own property and finances, or it could be activated on incapacity or some other event. And if that's the case, then generally it would be the agent who is making those decisions at that point. What decisions does the agent make? Only what the document authorizes, because at its heart, it's a contract. It describes the scope of the decision-making that's allowed. For healthcare, for both of them, they must be in writing. They must be signed and dated by the individual. If the person's not physically capable of signing, they can direct somebody else to sign for them, but it must be in their presence and at their direction. They must be there and they must direct somebody to sign on their behalf, and it should say something along those lines if that happens. For healthcare, you have to have 2 disinterested witnesses if it's signed in Wisconsin. For financial, doesn't require witnesses. Strongly recommend getting it notarized. Most banks are probably not going to take it if it hasn't not been notarized. We verify that the person whose document it is the person who signed it. What does sound mind mean? It's not defined in our statutes anywhere, but it comes up in case law having to do with estate planning, with creating wills, creating other kinds of financial and other estate documents. Generally, it means the person understands what it is they're signing, the effect of that document, and they have periods of lucidity in which they're able to understand what they're doing. Pretty low standard. It's lower than the standard for being able to make complex healthcare decisions, for example. Somebody might not really be able to understand what's going on with their care, especially if they have a new condition, especially if it's really complicated, but they may be very confident about who they want to in their life to make those decisions for them. Sound mind is a judgment call of the 2 witnesses for the power of attorney for healthcare or the notary for financial. The only time we presume somebody's not of sound mind is if they already have a guardian. Now, it is a presumption, and that can be overcome. So if it's very clear the person doesn't know what's happening, I would expect those witnesses to not witness, to determine they don't believe that person knows what's happening. And a lot really depends on the nature of the incapacity. If somebody already has some impairment of some kind, is it the kind of situation where they're very clear on things in the morning, but they fade as the day goes on? If they're signing it in the morning and they're having a good day, may well be fine. Is it the sort of situation where they will sign anything anybody puts in front of them? Very, very different situation there. And I think especially if we are considering creating a power of attorney or creating a new power of attorney document after there's that impairment, particularly if somebody's creating a new document, the question after they've already had one, the question for me would be, what is the scope of the changes that they're making? Are they changing the order of their agents? Are they bringing in somebody new who hasn't been involved but just showed up yesterday and wants to take over everything? Do they have one person in their family who's now more available, who's been very closely involved? So that's the kind of thing, if you have questions about the circumstances in which a POA was created, that's kind of where I would start to look. How is that person doing overall? What is the circumstance of that signing? Who are the witnesses? The Board on Aging and Long-Term Care has a position paper that does talk about how sound mind can exist after activation, because it's not the same as incapacity. We follow that as well. It's on their website if you'd like to find it. I will note, not all attorneys agree about that, and not all providers and facilities may agree about that. So if somebody has a power of attorney for healthcare, it's activated, they decide they want to make a change, they create a new one, it's possible that a facility may not accept it. So it's always, I think, a good idea if somebody's already in a facility or going to one to check with them and find out whether or not they will take it. They have protection from liability as long as they believe that document is valid. And if they decide it's not, then they lose that protection and they may decide it's more risk than they want to take on. So that's their call to make there. Let's talk briefly about who can be agents for healthcare. It should be a named individual, not somebody by a position like priest of my parish at time of activation, which we have in here as an example because we saw it once. The statutes don't talk about whether or not you can have co-agents. I generally think it's not a good idea because what happens if they don't agree? What happens if one person talks to one provider and the other person talks to the other provider and they're not getting the full picture and they're making decisions based on only half the information? So I have seen documents drafted that way. Some other states do explicitly allow it. I usually suggest asking if they're willing to designate a point person to make sure that somebody's getting all of the information. Then they can work together to decide how they want to do that from there. I get questions occasionally if people don't have anybody in their life that they want to name. I know some corporate guardians will act as healthcare agents. I know that there are care management and support service agencies that will sometimes do that. There's open questions as to whether or not you should just name that organization versus a specific individual. I don't know that there's a great answer to that right now. I will note that the agent cannot be a healthcare provider who is currently providing services to the person or an employee of one unless they are related. So if it's one of those care management or support services agencies, they cannot also be providing healthcare services to that person while they are acting as agent. There's a conflict of interest. We want to know that they're making decisions that are in the interest of the person, not their employer. For a healthcare document, the agent themselves cannot designate their own successor. So you can have as many alternates as you want, but the person themselves has got to be the one to list them. For a financial document, it's a little bit more flexible. You can have co-agents. You can decide whether they can act independently or if they must agree. The agent can be somebody by an organization or position by title. So trustee officer at my bank, something like that is fine. The POA itself may give the agent authority to name their own successor, but it's got to explicitly be in there for them to be able to do that. How are they activated? Healthcare, typically on incapacity, which is defined as the inability to receive and evaluate information and or communicate decisions relating to healthcare. Determined by two physicians or a physician and an advanced practice clinician who can be a psychologist, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant, or as stated on the POA document itself. So there are older documents in Wisconsin because our law changed in 2020, which I guess was 5 years ago now and feels like yesterday. Our law changed to allow PAs and NPs to sign off, but there are older documents that don't list that. Documents from other states may have different requirements. Documents drafted by attorneys may have different requirements if that's what the person wanted. Follow what that document itself says. It controls how it's activated. For financial, the default in state law is that it's active right away as soon as it's signed, but it can be set to be springing, which means it can be activated on incapacity or some specific event. I've seen them activated for people who travel, people who snowboard. They might have it active while they're out of state in their other home. I've seen them active for somebody who may be incarcerated, which hopefully is not going to be an issue for folks in this population, but could be. It really depends on what that person wants, what their needs are. If it is activated on incapacity, unless the document says otherwise, state law requires only one physician to activate that. The standard is not the same. You can't use that same healthcare statement to activate a financial POA because for healthcare, those providers who are determining that incapacity are looking at that person's ability to make healthcare decisions. They're looking at whether or not they're capable of informed consent for care. They're not assessing their ability to make financial decisions. So I think most of the time, banks are going to tell you that's not good enough because it doesn't say anything about their ability to handle their finances. Some banks may decide otherwise, that's their call to make. So what's the authority of the agent? For healthcare? Healthcare decisions and only healthcare decisions. So that means they don't get to decide about things like visitation because that's not a healthcare decision. They must follow the wishes of the person where known, whether it's written in the document or as expressed at any time. And our statutes are very clear that it is at any time. If you've ever looked at that statutory notice on the front of the healthcare POA, if it's the state form or something similar, it says right in there, no care will be given or withheld from you over your objection. And that includes after activation. For financial, decisions as outlined in the document must follow the reasonable expectations of that person for property management. There are some limitations on things like gifting and self-dealing written into statute. If the agent is going to be allowed to do those things, it must be written into that document. Otherwise, they're not allowed to do it. In Wisconsin, we have a couple of other things that our agents must specifically have authority to do for healthcare. They must explicitly be given authority to admit for long-term care in a SNF or a CBRF. They must also be given explicit authority to withdraw or withhold a feeding tube. For younger adults, if somebody has some sort of an early onset dementia, they also must be given explicit authority to make decisions if that person is known to be pregnant. If that is not given and the person is pregnant and the document is activated, the agent can't do anything. They have to be given that authority to make any decisions at all if that person is known to be pregnant. So what that means is that if the person has left the boxes blank for the long-term care facilities, or if they've checked the no box, the agent can make pretty much any other healthcare decision, but they cannot admit for long-term care. They can admit for post-inpatient rehab. They can admit for respite. They cannot admit for long-term care. They would have to go through the court to do that. And since they have to follow the wishes of the person, even if that box is checked yes, if the person gets there and says, no, I don't want to be here, or is consistently trying to leave, or is planning to move to Florida and makes that comment every day, something along those lines, if they are making it very clear they don't want to be there, the agent can't keep them there. They have to follow the wishes of that person. And I get asked occasionally, why is that? I mean, we know this person is not capable of making healthcare decisions. Why are we deferring to them? Because a POA doesn't remove rights. And that helps provide a check on agent authority. Being admitted to long-term care can be a pretty significant impact on somebody's personal liberty. We want to make sure that if we're doing it, it's because it's necessary. And by that, I mean that if we're going to do that against somebody's will, we're going to have a court step in and decide that it's really what is needed for this person. Again, some of those limits on gifting self-dealing, the person can revoke at any time. They may or may not be able to create a new one, but they can still revoke it. The court can review an agent's actions. The court can also step in with a guardianship and or protective placement if there's something going on. Some of those legal safeguards, if the court has been involved, if somebody has asked the court to take a look at that POA, they can decide whether it's valid. If you have competing POA documents for financial, they can decide which one is valid. They can look at the conduct of the agent. They can ask the agent to report to the court. They can take the agent out. If there's an alternate, they can put the alternate in. They can order the agent to follow that document. It really depends on the situation. Sometimes it's going to be worth it to do this. Sometimes it's not. It really depends on what's going on. In some situations where you know an agent is doing something wrong, it can be faster to look at guardianship if you know you're going to have to do that anyway. Like if they're the only agent left and there's no alternates, you may end up having to go for guardianship anyway if you remove them. So sometimes this is done as part of a guardianship action, but it can be done separately as well. When we talk about deactivating versus revoking a POA, deactivation means that person's regained capacity. Document still exists. It can be used again in the future. No formal process in state law for it. So for healthcare, some facilities and providers say one is enough to sign off, some want two. It's really up to them, their own policy to do that. Document's still there if the person needs it. Revoking gets rid of that document. It's gone. It no longer exists. It cannot ever be used again. And there's a handful of ways to do that. Destroy the document, sign a statement indicating intent to revoke, state intention to two witnesses. For healthcare, create a new healthcare POA if you're able to, and that will automatically revoke a past one. For financial, that's not true because you can have more than one. So you can do this with a financial POA, but it would have to specifically say it revokes past documents. Another common question, we do recognize documents from other states as long as they are validly executed in that state. The signature requirements may be different. So some states allow a healthcare POA to be notarized. That's fine. We'll accept that if they allow that. It cannot be notarized in Wisconsin, but an Illinois one allows it. Minnesota, I think, does. So if you've got a document from a state that's got a notary blank on it and it's notarized, that's probably going to be fine. Those activation requirements may be different. Follow that document. And because we've got those specific directives for things like long-term care, If that document doesn't have any language along those lines, the document's still valid. It just means the agent doesn't have that authority. So something to kind of keep a lookout for. Let's talk a little bit about guardianship, what can happen if somebody doesn't have those documents in place. Guardianship is a court process. Only a court can appoint a guardian. We have both guardian of person and of estate. Someone may have one or both. They can have different people as guardians for each. Can be temporary, 60 to 120 days, or permanent. If it's temporary, that person must meet the standard of likely to be incompetent, which does not require that full evaluation. It requires a statement or testimony from a physician or psychologist that they are likely to be incompetent. The court, when doing a guardianship, will look at whether that person's advance directives, if they have any, are valid and enough to meet their needs. So if somebody has a healthcare POA in place, it allows long-term care, the person's not objecting to long-term care, the court might want to know, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Where the court would be involved is if the agent is doing something they shouldn't, or there are no agents who are willing to act, or if that agent doesn't have the authority they need. So they need to admit to long-term care, but the person's objecting. They need to admit to long-term care, but the box is checked no. In both of those situations, that document is not sufficient to meet their needs. So the court would then perhaps get involved. Guardianship appoints a legal decision maker who's subject to court oversight and review, and it determines what authority that decision maker will have. For incompetency, that's the standard for guardianship. It means that that person has some sort of a long-term or permanent impairment, which can be developmental disability, serious and persistent mental illness, degenerative brain disorder like dementia, other like incapacities, anything that gets them to a point where they're not able to receive and evaluate information or communicate decisions, and it's not likely to improve. That's the long-term or permanent. It's not likely to improve, or it will continue to decline. That impairment must make it to the point where they're unable to meet their essential needs for health and safety, or unable to provide for their own support and prevent financial exploitation. And there has to be no less restrictive alternative available. So if somebody still could do a POA, we'd prefer that, because guardianship will take rights away. It is much more complicated, and the person has less say in what it looks like and less say in who their decision maker is. But if that's not an option, then we would look at guardianship. It is not uncommon that somebody will have a healthcare POA and no financial, because they'll get their POA documents from their provider, and their provider may have told them you should do a financial, but they may or may not have done it. That was the case with my own parents. They both did their healthcare POAs when they moved to Wisconsin. I made them redo them in early 2021, I think, and I asked them very nicely repeatedly to do them so that nobody would have to go to court if it became necessary. Anyway, they did their POAs when they moved to Wisconsin in early 2021 for healthcare, but they didn't get around to doing the financial because they had to go find a notary. They could ask the neighbors to help sign off and be their witnesses for their healthcare, but they had to go find a notary for the financial, and that was enough of a hardship that I just didn't get around to it. They finally did it last year, so they are not alone in that situation. It is very, very, very common. So you might see a situation where somebody needs a guardian of the estate because nobody can handle their financial matters legally, but they have a decision maker for healthcare. That's pretty common. Might be the other way around. They might have had a financial POA or a trust or something set up already so that they have that decision making in place, but they don't have anybody to handle their healthcare. You can see that sometimes situations where they have a third party or commercial trustee to handle all of the finances, but they don't have anybody left to be healthcare agent, like their agents have all passed on, something like that. When somebody has a POA, the court can leave POAs in place when they appoint a guardian. They don't have to. They may just clear them out just so it's cleaner. If somebody has a living will to designate their end of life decisions, it does not invalidate that. The guardian authority does go beyond these POA documents. The guardian must make decisions in that person's best interest. And the reason I have this quote in here from this end of life case from '97 is because when we talk about what that best interest is, we talk about including that person in the decision making, This is what we mean. If we know what that person's wishes are, they may have written them down in a power of attorney document. They may have documented them. They may have had those conversations at some point to talk about, here's what I want. It's going to be in that person's best interest to follow those for the most part. And that's what the guardian should do. If you're working with a guardian, their letters of guardianship should say whether there's still a power of attorney document in effect. So you can see that in that document there. Limitations on guardianship. Guardian cannot consent to psych treatment or meds over that person's objection. They cannot place for long-term care in a facility licensed for 16 or more beds or a facility of any size if the ward objects without going through court. If that's the situation, they'll have to have a protected placement order through the court. They cannot place for short-term care if the primary purpose of that placement is for treatment of mental illness. They cannot get any gifting. They may need court permission for things like selling real estate. So if the person's home needs to be sold to pay for their care, the guardian may need to go back to court to get that specific authority to do that. They only have the authority granted to them in that order. So when we talk about all these things in general, what we're doing, we're talking about balancing protection and power. For somebody who has been used to making their own decisions their entire life, it can be incredibly difficult, incredibly traumatic to be at a point where they're no longer able to do that, no longer allowed to do that. It can be incredibly frustrating. They may not understand why some of their ability to make decisions has been taken away. They may not understand why they can't have access to their own money. It can be really, really hard. And so I think we want to make the whole point here is to try to make sure that we are honoring this person and their wishes and respecting their own ability to make their own decisions as long as we possibly can. They get a voice in their treatment decisions, in their living situation. Again, that's why we have that limitation for a healthcare POA. That person still has a say. They have the right to have a say. And I think if we were to sit down and think about what we would want, if we have a family member who says, nope, you're going to go live in a facility now, and you don't want that, you should have the right to say so and have somebody listen to you and have the right to have your point heard and decide whether or not you really need that. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people are protected from harming themselves. If they're at a point where they're at risk of substantial harm because they can't make their own medical decisions, because they can't pay their bills, then it is time perhaps to consider intervening. And if we have documents where they already are aware that this is going to be a thing, that's often better. But it's still really hard. So finding that balance is going to look different for every person and every family. The more we can talk about it ahead of time, the better it's going to be a lot of the time. When we're working with vulnerable adults, when you've got somebody in this situation, we start from the point where we look at what is the decisional capacity for what they want to do. So again, if we're talking about somebody who wants to stay in their home, what are the risks of them doing that? How much do they understand those risks? How foreseeable is harm there? Like if they're a fall risk and they have a home that has a lot of stairs and they're not at a point where they understand that they maybe can't navigate those stairs, then perhaps we look at where, if they need to be living somewhere other than that. But if they have generally been okay in their home, is it time to move them or not? If they are still able to understand the risks of where they are or accept mitigation, something like that, what is that option right there for that person? What can we do to help prevent that harm? Are there things that we can do that are less restrictive, short of moving somebody to a facility or bringing in other caregivers? What can we do to help keep them and their wishes as part of that process, talking to them, not about them, in front of them? What do they want, and how can we address that as much as possible? And we look at their prognosis as well. How quickly are they declining? Do they have a lot of good days? Do they have a lot of bad days? How are they doing right now? How is that likely to change in the next 2 months, next 6 months, next year? The same conversations that Karen was talking about come up with this thing as well. When you're working with decision makers, if you have questions about the decisions being made, what is the decision-making standard we're talking about? So for POAs, are the person's wishes known? Is the agent following them? if you have questions about those POA documents, who were the witnesses? What were the circumstances in which it was signed? Is the person able to express an opinion about the agent or the agent's actions? If they made a change, were they consistently talking about, this is the change that I want, this is who I want? For guardians, what's the scope of the order? What's the person's wishes? What's the least restrictive option for them? Not just in general. So for placement, again, we'd be looking at not just the type of facility, but how can that facility meet their needs best? Do they want to be in the community? Do they prefer to attend religious services at a particular place of worship? Do they still have a job? Do they have community activities they participate in? What can we do to help enable that? Are they somebody who prefers to be in wide open space? Do they get really overwhelmed by sound and noise and light? In that case, maybe they would prefer something that's a little less urban. Or if there's somebody who really needs people around them to thrive, maybe we want something that's in a city. So all of those things we want to consider when we're deciding, okay, it's time for placement. What does that look like for this person? And I think I'm about out of time, and that I think was at about the end of my slides. So I will turn it over now to
You
Carrie.
can go ahead and finish your last 2 slides if you'd like, or whatever. I think you don't have that many.
Yeah, I just got you.
Yeah.
One with content, and the last one's my contact information. So the question, again, I've been talking a little bit about the right to refuse care and what that looks like. So I'll cover this, and I've talked about it a little bit already. With our power of attorney for healthcare, Chapter 155 retains that right to refuse care. I talked about that standard notice. So what happens then if that refusal puts the person at risk of imminent harm? Here's a good example. If you have somebody who has diabetes, it's been untreated, they don't recognize that they have diabetes, they absolutely refuse to change their medications or accept any medications or start on insulin or anything like that, whatever it might be. One question to ask might be, what's the reason for the refusal? Is it denial about the fact that they have it, or is it the form of medication we're asking them to take? And if it's the form of medication, what can we do to help negotiate that? But if that person is at risk of imminent harm and the agent needs to be able to act, that's a situation where perhaps you would look at guardianship then. Guardian has authority generally to override that person's wishes, but should they? And that's a question that's going to be very dependent on the specific facts. What is the harm? What are the person's wishes? For both of those, what if it's not clear if the person's actually objecting to care? And that's a huge, huge issue when it comes to objecting to placement in a facility. If the person is saying, I don't want to be here, but we don't have any way of knowing that it's really a genuine objection. I mean, if they would object to that in their own home because they don't recognize where they are, or if they're saying no, 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 because they like the sound of the word, not because they're actually objecting to something, how do we know? How can we tell? And it's not always easy. And that's something that lawyers will often argue about in court. It's something that caregivers and providers will often have to try to figure out. And there's not always easy answers. But that's part of those ongoing conversations. Okay, and then my last slide is the contact information, and these slides will go out. You'll have it. And now I'll turn it over.
Wow, what a whirlwind coverage of some very complex, challenging, detailed information. Good job. We are now going to move on to our final presenter. Again, thank you, Polly. Complex information. Is everybody seeing the slides okay? If so, then I'm going to turn over to Sergeant Carrie Peters.
Thank you, Jody. Hi, everybody. I'm Sergeant Carrie Peters. I work with the Appleton Police Department, and I'm really excited to be here presenting along with Karen and Polly today about some important issues to better equip communities and families to prepare themselves to serve their family members better or their community members better. So today I'm going to talk about collaborative programs for families and first responders. And I'm just going to be noting to Jody to turn my slides. She can go to the next one. And that's because I'm at home today and my home computer wasn't working consistently recently. So I just want to make sure the slides would change. So today we're going to talk about Purple Angel training and Project Safe Response. So we can go to the next slide. In Purple Angels training, Karen actually touched on dementia aware or Purple Angel training earlier during her excellent section of this webinar. And so, like she said, Purple Angel training or having an organization become dementia aware is something that the ADRC provides. And a lot of times they will do this training for organizations like grocery stores and banks and salons, really anywhere that people will go in the community to make sure that their staff is trained and how to interact successfully with their clients or community members living with dementia. And I was approached probably in 2019 about having this training brought to the Appleton Police Department. And with our police department, we're kind of a medium-sized city, about 78,000 people. So we have a lot of officers that worked all the different shifts. So training our officers entirely on this can be really challenging. Training law enforcement on this stuff is very different than a bank teller or a stylist at a salon. We have different interactions with people in the community living with dementia and their families. And having a background kind of in a dementia certification and some personal connections to dementia with my father-in-law, I thought it was really important that our officers get like a very specific law enforcement training. So the ADRC and Fox Valley Memory Project was kind enough to partner with us in creating a law enforcement specific dementia awareness or Purple Angel training. And we did that in a video format so that way all of our officers could watch it as time allows and get certified. So now we have the Dementia Aware sticker at our police department. All of our officers are trained in it, and any new officers will be trained in it. And I think it's really important that law enforcement gets this training. I've worked with the Appleton Police Department 17 years, and I can tell you that I've seen the calls for service involving individuals living with dementia has risen steadily and is going to continue to do so. And it's really important that officers and people in general, all of our first responders, I mean, really, I think it's an important training for everyone, but first responders in particular, just because of the different behaviors that people will exhibit, because we're trained, to keep people safe, to deal with threats and things like that. And we get trained in crisis response with people dealing with mental health issues and how to de-escalate those situations. And I think it's really important that people learn how to de-escalate people with dementia, because that's a very different situation. There's different tools that you can use to accomplish that, because we want to have safe, positive interactions when we're out there. So the Purple Angel training goes over basics so people can learn that dementia isn't just being forgetful. It can change people's abilities to recognize things like thirst and hunger. People might feel the hunger pains that we feel. It's lunchtime now. Some of us might be feeling those, and we know we want to go get something to eat or we want to go get something to drink. And somebody with dementia may feel those things, but then not make that connection to get something to eat. And so it's important that their caregivers know to watch that, but it isn't something that everybody just knows. So it's important to learn because those people can become malnourished, dehydrated if they don't have somebody that's keeping an eye on their intake. So in turn, if those hunger pains or dehydration become so significant, it might turn into a negative behavior because they feel these things. They don't know what to do to make it subside and get better. So then it might come out in a negative behavior or something like that. So it's really important, I think, for everybody to get trained, and especially first responders, as we have more and more interactions out in the communities with people living with dementia. We have a lot of different types of situations that we get called to. It could be somebody that maybe got disoriented while they were out on a walk. We've had that happen a number of times where maybe somebody who very commonly walks their dog or goes out for a walk in their neighborhood every day with dementia, that one day, finally gets lost, right? So, like Karen mentioned, you don't expect certain things to happen until they do. So, a few years ago, we had a gentleman who was out walking his dog as he did every day. And then all of a sudden, hours go by and he wasn't back, and his wife ended up having to call us. And there had been a rainstorm that had since come through. And eventually we did locate him. She had given a really good description. We were able to get that out to people. And we were able to locate him and get him brought home successfully. So we have, calls where we are called to a situation like that, where somebody has eloped, wandered, or gotten lost. We might have a situation where somebody becomes confused while they're running an errand. They go into the grocery store and they kind of have been wandering around the store for a long time and, forgot what they were doing or how to get back. So we get called to a lot of different welfare checks as well. And just having the tools from Purple Angel training to be able to have an interaction where you're carrying yourself in a kind, empathetic manner to make that person feel comfortable is really important, rather than just kind of being that firm police officer that people might stereotypically think of us as. So we need to make sure that we're presenting ourselves in a softer manner for those people to feel comfortable and to have those good interactions. And part of that training is also training officers as to the appropriate agencies within the community that we can refer people to, right? I mean, essentially, somebody living with dementia and their family might be, living and going about their daily lives without any support from any outside agencies. And then, something happens like the situations I described before. And that's the first time that these things have happened, or the first time maybe they've had police interaction. But ultimately, the police aren't who's going to help that family moving forward through their journey with the disease. So, our officers learn to make referrals or connect people with the ADRCs and other community organizations. We get familiarized with like an Appleton or the Fox Cities, Fox Valley Memory Project, St. Paul Elder Services, some of these organizations that are out there that have programs and that are going to help families. And they're going to find them where they're at, whether they need help within their home, whether they're looking at a care facility, whether they're looking at just how to remain active in the community with different programming. So it's important for officers to know that too, where to kind of hand the baton and point people when they need that help. So that training goes over that as well. So we can go to the next slide. And so Project Safe Response. And this is like the Purple Tube, which again, Karen mentioned earlier. It's just kind of a different variety of it. As she said, the Purple Tube is a program where there is actually a physical tube, kind of like File for Life, that is kept within the home for first responders should they get called to somebody's house for something. And Project Safe Response is very similar information. It's a packet going over those types of things that Karen talked about, health history, emergency contact, ways to gain rapport with somebody. If they have any challenges like vision challenges, communication barriers, things that kind of trigger them or upset them, things like that. So we can have those positive interactions. And then with Project Safe Response, it's actually kept in our first responder database. So for Appleton Police Department, we are primarily in Outagamie County, but we also have a portion of Calumet and Winnebago County as well. So the program is or Project Safe Response is just for the city of Appleton folks. And then we keep the files on our computers, like in cyberspace, for first responders to be able to access. So our computer program system that fire, ambulance, and police use is through Outagamie County. So all of this information, if you put in the person's name or their address, it's going to pop up an alert with all this information, including a picture. So that way, like if we were to come across somebody who didn't have good communication skills any longer and they had wandered and we didn't know who they were because nobody had called them in yet, we can also find their picture in our registry to be able to help identify them. So Project Safe Response is also another collaborative effort between the ADRC and Fox Valley Memory Project. And so the website is below for our link to just see where it is for our city of Appleton, and you can see like a copy of the packet that we use and the information release. So when somebody registers for the program, I get the packet of information, and then I'll reach out to them and I will discuss with them their situation. And then if they have not been connected with the ADRC already, or Fox Valley Memory Project, I discuss those organizations and the program that they have, and then see if they should maybe sit down with the dementia care specialist there, or one of the staff members at Fox Valley Memory Project, if those are organizations they want to get involved with. So again, Project Safe Response is really a good way for our officers then to be notified of this information, to be prepared to have safe and positive interactions with people. But then it's also kind of bridging that gap in services. So if people, you know, might need more services, they can be connected to the appropriate places and talk to those folks. And then so every year with the program, we go through and I reach out to all the participants' relatives and verify if there are any updates in information, like have they moved, have there been any changes in behavior, anything that we need to be notified of to update our information and things like that. So so far we've had some really good benefits to this program. Next, I'd like to just talk about how both Project Safe Response and the Purple Angel training can be brought to other communities. So the Purple Angel training that we created several years ago now, like I said, was on video. So though it is geared essentially towards Appleton Police Department, I have shared it with other agencies who have now become Purple Angel certified across the state. We're looking at updating the training, hopefully within the next year or so. But again, it is in a video format. If there are other police departments that are interested in getting that, I can send a link to anybody regarding that training. As far as Project Safe Response, it is a program that can be brought to any county or municipality. So like I said, for us, it is for City of Appleton residents. And a lot of other places have similar registries, or they can kind of highlight people's contacts in their systems. Not all of our systems are exactly the same, but all have the capabilities to be able to flag someone in their system with dementia. And so with that, I've talked to a couple different agencies. Our dementia care specialist in Outagamie County, Tracy Edmondson, connected me with Calumet County Sheriff's Department, and they have since implemented Project Safe Response. I've also talked to like Menasha Police Department about implementing a similar program. So I'm happy to talk to any agencies out there that are you know, kind of questioning the logistics of how to run a similar program. And it's not like a one size fits all thing. Not everybody wants to like join the program that has dementia. A lot of people do it as a precaution. Some people do it for their loved ones as soon as they get a diagnosis as a just in case, just kind of a safety net to fall back on if the time comes. Hopefully it never has to get used, but it's there in case it does. And, with the Purple Tube Project, it's a very similar program. The only difference is that it's kept in the home because not everybody likes the idea of all their information being stored in a database or something like that. And that's okay. So then they just have it physically at their home. So it's good that there are these different options of similar programs out there for people because they might prefer one to the other. And like I said, at minimum, even if you don't implement the full program where you have the full packet, at minimum, an agency can just flag a person in-house and note that they have dementia, and they can note an emergency contact and a couple little basic bits of information like that. And anybody can ask for, or any relative can ask, can contact the police department to add that flag as a precaution and things like that. And it really does help family members kind of feel a little bit more at ease because nobody ever wants to call the police, in life. You don't want to have a situation where you need to call us. But when you do, myself and all officers want everybody to feel comfortable with the level of training the officers have to be able to deal with the situations they get called to. And to make sure that it was a good interaction and that we were helpful in the best ways that we can. So if we could go to the next slide. So yeah, this is my contact information. Again, I'm happy to discuss further the programs that I did today with any organizations out there and to let you know how you might be able to run it locally. And then I guess we can cut to questions.
Thank you also for a wonderful presentation, Carrie. Much appreciated. So, Carrie, if you want to put your email in the chat and then your website would be helpful to put in the chat too, that'd be great. We're going to open up for questions, but I would like to stop the recording. And before doing so, just wanted to just warmly thank our presenter today. With the content was phenomenal. Some of it very complex, some of it just great nuggets of gold for us to utilize. With that, I'm going to stop the recording.